Good evening, Flawless family. I am a pleasure to be joined by Ife Lenard, who is the Meeting House's director for the Thurgood Marshall Academy Lower School program. She is an independent strategic coach to school leaders, a graduate school professor, and a staff developer to educators, clinicians. And also, she got her Bachelor's of Science in Human Ecology from Morgan State University, as well as a master's degree in clinical social work and educational leadership from Columbia University. So that's 2 degrees, 2 master's degrees from Columbia University, my alma mater. So thank you, Ife, for joining us, and go Lions.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is a pleasure. I really wanted to be able to get on a forum where I could be able to share, who I am and exactly what I've been doing out here. Thank you.
Of course, and I'm so excited to dive into, all the topics and questions we have for you today. But first, to me, the most important question I'll have for you is, just with it being such a tough year, I really want to know, how are you really doing right now?
I'm well. I made a decision to be well. I have a platform of radical wellness, and there has been many times throughout 2020 where I had to really make sure that I am purposeful in how self-care plays itself out in my life, in my home, for my family. So that's important. I have to be able to figure out ways in which to recalibrate, pause, stop, in order to be able to continue through the hour or continue through the next day. It has been a lot to be able to deal with the two twins of this year. When I say that, I'm really referring to a twin pandemic, right? COVID-19, as well as the racialized violence, the public murders that we have been experiencing. And so to have that replayed from different sounds and voices in my home, from the television or reading or through conversations through Zoom or GoToMeet or Google Meet or any of the digital platforms that we're on, or just the regular telephone, you are reminded, I have been reminded that this has been a tough year. And so I had to be able to figure out ways to recalibrate and pause so that I could remain radically well.
Exactly. And as you mentioned, like probably the highlights of the years in a year full of distressing events is, like you said, I love you said twin pandemics, but you also mentioned how you're purposeful about self-care. And I love that, especially us being, a brain health organization. And now that we're in July, it being July 2nd, as we're doing this interview, it's also Minority Mental Health Month. So I want to get your thoughts on the idea of a Minority Mental Health Month and awareness months in general. Do you think that it's good to draw attention to it, or what is your thought process on these specific targeted awareness months?
You need strategic reminders to be able to inform the community, to be able to expose people to what is going on out there. And so themes or months that identify awareness, that's important. I think for me, the word minority is one of those coded language words, right? And so minority means less than. And so there's nothing less than about me or my race, right? I am not minor, nor are people of color minor. And so there's a coded language in that. And so mental health is a part of all of humans and a part of all of our lives. And so if we have, people of color, Black, Indigenous, people of color, mental health month, then so be it. But there's absolutely nothing minor about mental health or the Black race at all.
Thank you. I love and appreciate that take on that. And so continue on to something you've already referenced so far. Now, the death of George Floyd has brought the topic of racial injustice into the national spotlight. So, I'm curious to know, what was your initial reaction when you learned about the death? And since then, how have you been taking care of your own mental health?
So my initial reaction was raw. I was grief-stricken. Mm-hmm. I was re-traumatized. This is a man who literally gave his life for the world. And this is not the first time this has been a national event. We have been here before. And because we are in a historical moment right now, doesn't mean that this didn't replay during previous civil rights or human rights or demonstrations for war. And there is a difference between protesters and rioters and looters. And so I recognize that the public lynching, because that's exactly what it was a public lynching of Brother Floyd, that he was able to resurge the amount of trauma regarding police brutality, and that we were all born into a world, we inherited this earth where people of color, where Black people, where anti-Black racism is alive and well. It is kicking. And the world has done a very good job at oppressing its people. And so that level of re-traumatization is because Brother Floyd is my family. When I see him, I see my uncle, my father, my 3 brothers, my nephews, my son, right? And so we meaning Black people, we have sons and husbands and families and nephews and brothers who look like him. And the same is when we felt that with Amadou Diallo and with Trayvon Martin and with Sandra Bland. I mean, there's so many names, known and unknown, and that have not been recorded, that have not been recorded. And so I have remained grief-stricken. It was extremely difficult that next day, the next 3 days, the next week. It takes a while to be able to move through bereavement and grief. And it doesn't mean that it went away. And there's a difference between crying and weeping. And the sorrow, as a Black woman, as a Black mother, and a Black sister, and so I'm a Black aunt. And so all of these roles, have replayed in my mind. And it's not like you just cry. It just means that the tears just come, and they flow down. So it has been difficult. And so I've made purposeful decisions. Again, self-care is about, I really have to think about it. Like, what am I going to do to bring kindness to myself? What am I going to do to pay attention? What do I have to prioritize? And those are aspects of self-care. To make a conscious decision to slow down, to think about what sleep deprivation could do to my body, my mind, my soul. There's a soul that exists in this body. And so I need to take care of all parts of me spiritually. And so there are times that I have to move into spiritual resourcing to be able to get with elders or like-minded people or family, to be able to envelope me in nurture, in care, in song, through dance, rituals of cleaning, rituals of spiritual baths, prayer. It has been a concerted effort to be able to think about, how do I honor Brother Floyd, who is now an ancestor, and how do I honor those that he has joined, and how do I continue to be a clinical social worker and to be an educational leader in all of my roles, as a mom, as a professor. How do I continue to honor him and those known and unknown, to be in direct opposition to why they are no longer with us, to be in favor of racial identity development, to be in favor of helping people to create pathways for love and kindness to themselves. When we talk about love thy neighbor, it's hard to love thy neighbor if you don't feel that that neighbor is worthy. If you don't have an internalized belief system that they are beautiful and divine. And so when I know that I walk the streets, or when my children go outside and walking the street to our car, to the store, to the mailbox, that I want to feel that I can return, that my children will return home alive, without holes in their bodies, without, a scarred self-esteem or confidence. It has been difficult to to keep the pathways of self-care uh, alive. But it's a must. It's a must-have. It's absolutely non-negotiable.
Yeah, and what I'll say is first thing is I appreciate and I commend you for, really exemplifying what self-care is and being so purposeful about it, which is hard for a lot of people. It's hard to make a priority, so I commend you for that. And then also, I love some of the words you use: traumatizing, sorrow, grief-stricken. For me, I look back to my first introduction to this part of the world was Trayvon Martin. And seeing, like, knowing the details of that situation, and then seeing his murderer be acquitted of charges was my first, like, whoa, like, this is everything I'm learning back about school, racism and injustice. That was my wake up call. Like, I'm still living in that moment. And I was 15, 16 years old when I really woke up into it. But, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'd love for you to talk more about how, as a professor, in your expert opinion, the impact that you think, watching and learning about the deaths of unarmed Black people have on other Black people.
We are at risk. And so we are, the impact is a reminder. The impact is that we are at risk. We are not exempt from someone feeling that they have that they have the authority, that they have the power, that they have the privilege and the sense of entitlement to take away my life. And so to be reminded that that is a possibility when you are going to and from your home, or when you are in your home eating ice cream, watching television, that someone feels that it is permissible to do so. And so the impact is a stark reminder of what it means to be alive in this country or other countries. We are not exempt in other countries as well. And so the impact is up close and personal. The impact is evoking many to be raw, in a sense of the hypersensitivity and the hypervigilance. It takes a lot of mental and physical energy to actually be on alert, to actually to be mindful of speech, tone, your hands, when you are in the car. There are ways in which we have been taught. There are ways in which we teach our children. There are ways in which we provide true coping mechanisms and coping strategies to remind our sons, brothers, nephews, husbands, fathers, and uncles that this is real, and what it really means to actually be questioned because of a traffic or parking violation, and to know that your life could end in that seat. And so it is not, the impact is a, I don't know another word besides reminder. It's a survival skill that you have to gear up in certain ways. Just like we prepare for the cold weather, with gloves or scarf, or we layer up, or we prepare for hot weather and put on sunscreen and put on less clothes. There's a way to be able to prepare to enter the world. And so the impact is immense. There's an enormity, there's an enormous burden um, to live in this duality of love and kindness and survival skills, and surrounding myself in community to um, to be restored as we address harm being done to us, but even to listen to it is harmful. It changes you. It changes us molecularly. I feel, there are ways in which to try to get the sorrow out sometimes. It hurts,
Mm-hmm.
and then you remember the resilience. The impact is also to remember the resilience, the lineage and ancestry of resilience and the human capacity. All of our cultures, all of our families, all of our families have been through things. We are not the first people to go through a pandemic. We are not the first people to go through an onslaught of war or violence, whether it is through sexism, whether it is through classism or racism. That there are ways in which there are exemplar models that have showed us previously how to sustain a level of tenacity and fortitude to keep moving forward. And so my radical wellness platform is to continue to forge ahead. I must.
Mm-hmm. And something that you said there was kind of developing survival skills, which I think is possible when looking at blatant or overt racism. But racism's kind of a tricky thing. There's a lot of racism that you don't see to the blind eye, and I think part of that is through the education system. So I want to ask you, as currently a professor to graduate students, and we talked about how you were previously a dean and principal. How do you see racism manifest in the educational system?
So racism is difficult at times to detect. There are a host of entries into it, right? Tone, suggestions, there are microaggressions where there are subtle backhanded compliments. I didn't expect you to be so smart. Like, you're so articulate. I didn't expect that. But they don't necessarily say the latter part, like, I didn't expect that. And so polite, as though it would be appropriate to be rude, as though that there was an expectation for crude, lewd, or vulgar language in a conversation. So it is difficult to be able to pick up on or articulate that I saw a glance, that there was a body posturing, a movement that showed fear or terror because I have entered the room, not necessarily me as a woman, but because a Black person has entered the room, a threat. A Black man got out of a car, and so there's a glance, a look, a shake, a wink, a hint, a duck, there are many, many ways in which it shows up. And yet the feeling is the same. The feeling is the same, that I know something just happened. And so there are ways in which to be able to say, like, I know that you learn, as a professor, sometimes we have to say, like, is it just me, or did the tone in the room change? And so, and there are times in which we've had to do that. Many families have had to say, like, oh goodness, here comes Uncle so-and-so with the crude joke about somebody's accent or language or the way in which they do whatever when he's speaking about or she's speaking about another culture, or poking fun, or just says it's just, clean humor, we're just getting a good laugh. And so a level of racial identity development is being able to look at the internalized ways in which oppression has grounded itself in you, or the ways in which interpersonal racism happens regarding colorism, or outright bigotry, or outright stereotype or discrimination. That would be more overt, that to actually have behaviors and actions that stem from one stereotype or prejudice. And then there's the structural and institutional racism that is inherent in housing, law, hospitals, policy, education system, access in any of these institutional frameworks that make up our society. And so there are ways to navigate through it, but to be able to help people first with the language and the vocabulary. Sometimes people use the same words um, um, and they don't actually mean the same. You know, they think that because we're talking about equity, we're talking about racism, and it's not the same. They're two different wheelhouses. And so one's racial identity development happens over time, incrementally. You know, it's scaffolded. It's not one size fits all.
Wow. And, you know, part like so much of that is in teaching and educating and getting that information out there. And that's something that the Meeting House has, you know, I've seen really committed to. And the Flawless team has been a part of your community conversations that you've hosted. And while many organizations have made efforts toward racial justice in response to what is going on in the country, you know, you really made it, you know, your organization made it feel necessary to make, you know, racial identity and social justice not just a topic, but a priority. You know, what went into that thinking?
It was necessary. It is very easy to talk the talk and not walk the walk. And so I am a firm believer in one, like, I don't want to just talk about it. I want to be about it. Mm-hmm. And so we were having these conversations. And so it was like, let's just open it up to a larger audience. And why not? You know, because many people talk about talking about racism or race. And it's like, so we want to do this, we want to do this. And so let's stop saying we want to and let's just do it. You know, like, let's actually talk about it and lean into the discomfort. You know, that there are ways in which to be able to support people through a sense of nurture and a sense of belonging, that we can lean into and hold each other supportively and responsibly, and to be accountable to each other in brave conversations. You know, that the level of helplessness or fragility doesn't necessarily have to be a major ingredient in our attempt and success in having these brave conversations. And so it was like, let's just do it, you know.
Mm-hmm. And I hear all of the conversations thus far, and there's been a diverse group as well. And, you know, but a question that has always been tough for me to answer, just because of, you know, the emotional state that kind of puts me through, is, you know, for those who don't necessarily understand what Black people are going through, how can they support this movement? How can they support us? You know, how can they support the fight for racial justice?
Mm-hmm. To do the work. Right? And so we have to do the work in order to do the work. And so right now, for white people to research and study and to be an active listener, to tap into the emotional intelligent competencies of empathy, to know that I love my son and daughter the same way that you love your son and daughter. You know, that I want to thrive and survive and be of service to my family, to students, to schools, to couples, to, you know, clinicians and educators, that I have a level of direction and pathways. And so a part of that help and understanding is really to help thyself. You know, that there is a learned behavior in the cycle of socialization to be able to look to Black people and other people of color to provide an exact roadmap, or to just provide our own testimonials and that it's another call for us to be of service to them. And a part of it is like meeting each other, that I do my work to be able to learn about so many things. And so this is a part of this is just, leaning into understanding that there's work to be done, and to read, to provide yourself exposure to movies or documentaries. And many of my white friends and constituents and colleagues have been doing just that, and not also saying, what should I read and what should I watch? What do you suggest? Right? And it's about like researching and finding other people who are on a pathway such as you, to be able to learn from others. There are other white people who have been very eager and dedicated to be able to move to become an anti-Black racism ally for years or for months. And there are ways in which to be able to find that. And so thank you for asking that, because there are other ways. I mean, socioeconomically as well, to be able to, we're doing it at the Meeting House Forum, to be able to look into other poets or authors, books, documentaries, when it has been very easy to be able to say, well, like, I always wanted to see that movie, but I know this movie is here, let me watch it somewhere else, instead of like, let me actually go to the movies or watch this movie that I actually never wanted to get to. And understanding that that you negated, or that you chose not to go to a movie was because it was an all-Black cast, or you didn't want to get so deep and heavy. It's not always something painful, to watch a Black movie. It doesn't always have to be about slavery or civil rights. There are like other ways in which, entertainment can provide a lens into what Black love looks like. I know that movie, The Photograph, that came out earlier this year, but if people aren't accustomed to seeing Black love and only seeing love through other channels, other movies, regular Hallmark Channel, that there's less of a display, very, very small percentage of two Black couples being the primary featured couple of a romantic comedy or something like that. And so it really is just doing something different, and making a concerted effort, like, oh yeah, like this is what I'm thinking, store that is Black owned, or bookstore or something like that. There's certainly a list. I have provided about 75 things that white people could do to be in support of the movement and their own development regarding their own identity, looking at social and racial disparities. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's powerful, and that's a great directive for people who, are unsure of how they can get involved, how they can help the movement. But now speaking to those who are in it, who understand it, that experiencing it, the Black community, we mentioned before, a lot of the ways to describe how we're feeling, grief-stricken, sorrow, just the pain. Another word I like to use is just exhausted. What advice do you have for all of us for what we're going through?
Mm-hmm. There are stages to death and dying, and the traumatic experience of the repeated visualizations, the storytelling, listening to one's lived experiences about racial injustice, it does take a toll. There is a fatigue that comes with this. And so the stages of knowing what the stages are, to go through them, to be able to look at the shock, the anger, the level of bargaining, the level of confusion, shame, guilt, but then that there is joy and liberation, that comes with it. There's a level of acceptance, even in what I was sharing before, feeling raw and grief-stricken before regarding Brother George Floyd's public lynching. there is also an acceptance. I have moved into honoring him as an ancestor now, that to honor what has happened because of it, and not just I mean, there was a level of shock and disbelief and anger regarding it, but then you move past it. So it's important. I think our mental health, I know that our mental health is our mental health deserves a level of repair and restoration, for us to have a level of relief, to know that I can recover, that recovery is the norm, while simultaneously protesting, while simultaneously advocating, and the level of activism and the level of self-regulation and self-awareness and self-appreciation, or being in community. Deposits, all of those deposits help to restore ourselves mentally, and they help to rebuild our mental health because of the number of withdrawals, because of the pain, the anguish of racialized violence. And so there has to be a balance. Sometimes you have to recognize that I'm worth a reprieve sometimes. That's the restoration is important. And having those practices, having those contemplative practices, whether it is, like we said, dance, music, journaling, bear witness, a nature walk. There are several ways in which cleaning has been restorative. How do I beautify my home? How do I, do things to restore myself? And then I could shore up to go out and continue. That's what you want to be able to do. And the amount of time, the frequency, and how it's almost like you have to have a pervasive menu to fill yourself up with more deposits before you go out again, because it gets depleting. Like I said, it's a fatigue. And so I thank you for, just being able to have that part of the conversation, because the mental health is our sanity, and we are all deserving. It is our birthright to be calm and to have a sense of serenity, even as we're moving through trauma, because recovery is the norm.
Definitely. And as we talk about different self-care strategies, as we talk about that, these restorative practices that you mentioned, I also want to talk about something that you hinted at, and you mentioned before, radical wellness. And so I was fortunate enough to join the webinar with your colleague last week that was talking about radical wellness, and it was inspiring. And I love one thing that was mentioned. I'm not sure if it was you or your colleague, but it was mentioned how that just by being a Black woman who practices radical wellness, you're already kind of opposing your oppressor. So, I'm not going to act like I completely understand radical wellness after one session, but I want to give you the opportunity to talk about radical wellness and why, as a concept, is it so powerful?
It's so powerful because it is often unspoken. There is a socialization, and there is a way to be able to rear Black children, children of color, to keep moving ahead. And sleep deprivation or fatigue, or the wear and tear, the physical wear and tear of working hard, studying hard, advocating. And so sometimes there are ways in which we have been taught to uphold um, um, even positive stereotypes, keep going, work harder than others, in order to erode or erase negative stereotypes of laziness or, the get over mentality. And so when you are trying to be a credit to your race, that those are some of the messages that I definitely received. You work so hard. So to be radically well, it's like sometimes wellness means to slow down. Sometimes wellness means to ask for help, to know that I am deserving of support instead of I got it, I could do it on my own, I got this, been there, done that, took care of that, did all of that yesterday. Like a list, a to-do list that is like never ending. Like one goal takes 15 tasks to complete. And that, the messages, and so there are messages for Black women, there are messages for women, be strong, you be strong. And we say that to people, even at funerals, all kinds of homegoings, when we're, be strong, instead of saying it is okay for you to weep, and to experience your loss, and then to be on your own journey towards your wellness. We don't say like that. We don't say that. Like, let's hug. Let's hug. I think that when someone is medically ill, or when someone has completely become overworked, or they're completely out of balance, then we say, well, let them rest, let them have some time off. But by that time, they've lost a substantial amount of hair or weight, or, or they've totally gone, postal. I mean, that whole term, came from the trauma, the level of overexerted workload that people have from working in the postal office. And there were mass shootings in the postal office. And then we coined this term, someone went postal, right? And so then when somebody like totally flips, and then it's like, we should give them some time to, it's like, why can't I feel that I could, why can't I feel that I deserve to be radically well now? That I could, think about how I could be in good humor, in good company, to have good health, and to know that I am deserving of multiple entry points for joy and kindness, and to be in community like we are right now, that I could be unapologetically bold, that I could think about what nourishing foods I need to sustain my energy to do the work, not empty calories. Like all of the parts of wellness is truly mind, body, and soul. Diet, how to have deposits of healing factors. What tough conversations do I need to be able to have so that I could let go suppressed emotions? Like, I got to call that person. I got to, I want to journal that's been laying on my heart, and to know that I get to change my mind or relieve myself from a gripe that I've been holding on, that I could be radically well and let that gripe or that grudge go, that it's not serving me in any way. So the radical wellness is comprehensive at certain points, and sometimes it's just super simple, that I can declare my love and appreciation for you, and how proud I am of you being able to provide this forum for others. I celebrate that. And my own ability to tap into, not feel shy or reserved. No, I celebrate you. I am so proud. Absolutely. You and my son are doing a fine job at creating your pathways in your young adulthood, right? And what do I need to be able to do to provide a sense of nurture, to foster that to Black men who don't normally hear that, some of those positive messages from your teachers sort of stop around the third, fourth grade when you start to get older, when you become an image that may look like something that they should fear or be, in caution, be cautious to. No, I celebrate everything that you do. And so, and that helps to sustain our own sense of radical wellness. Yeah, it is bold, it is daring, it's unspoken, and it is my life's work to to choose to know that my wellness matters even in this space, even in this space, you know. And so I appreciate you allowing me, chance to be able to share that, you know. Our activism doesn't have to be um, what has been seen before. It could be a fine combination of firm and nurture, like the balance, like to weave that together. The intersectionality of wellness and emotional intelligence and racial identity development and racial pride and cultural pride. Like, why can't we just have all of those forums? And that will help me to be, culturally responsive and culturally relevant in all of my circles.
Yeah, you say you appreciate me, but truly I appreciate you, for sharing your story, for getting open, getting vulnerable with us. And I know that, I definitely appreciate the power in sharing your story and opening up and doing that. And it can be cathartic in a lot of ways, but at the same time, I know just with the topic and what we're dealing with, this is also a very tough conversation to be had. It's, in some ways re-traumatizing to be having this conversation. So I want to end on a, positive note. I want to learn or, hear about, what's giving you hope right now? What's giving you hope as we aim and work and move to a more flawless world? What right now is keeping you going, giving you hope and providing that positivity in your life?
Multiple things like keep me going. My children, my mother, my father, my colleagues that I have been working with, my friends, my nurses and doctors, my students, my, like, all of the combination of 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 their success, of their impact on my life keeps me going. You keep me going. Like this hour, I am fulfilled because of it. How could I would be remiss not to share that? You know, good conversation. It may be tough for some to listen, but it is necessary. I lean into it with ease at this point. I welcome it. So a lot of things keep me going. A good meal, a smile, like children, the work that we're doing for children with special needs, to build socialization skills, to be able to help them with areas of emotional fragility, to be able to provide forums for people regarding like the forums that we have on Fridays, the socialization about having brave conversations with heart, and as a way to also feel empowered. Like, that keeps me going. It is absolutely energizing and fulfilling. Absolutely. Thank you.
We appreciate, those words, and Ife, appreciate everything that you're doing and contributing to this work and to this practice. And what I'll tell the Flawless family is, if you want more from Ife, we'll have ways that you can find her and her work in our video description. But for now, thank you, Ife, for finding the time to have this important and impactful conversation. It made my day, and I hope it contributes to yours as well. So thank you, Ife.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.